Welcome to the South African Equestrian Federation's podcast From the Horse's Mouth. My name is Georgie Roberts, and I'm here today to talk about an increasingly pertinent topic for all the new parents and pony riders coming into equestrian sport, and that is pony height measuring. If you grew up like me, which was longer ago than I would like to admit, it seemed like a very simple, straightforward procedure that everything under 14.3 hands high was a pony and everything over was a horse. But this is having increasing ramifications on competition, and with children being the backbone and the future of our sport, this has knock-on ramifications that we're seeing massive results with. So it's a really important thing to discuss, and here to give us some clarity for all of the new people and the old, we have Dr. Summer Maitland-Stuart, and she's our vet today, and our our judicial counsel from the SAEF, Peter Swanepoel, again sitting with us. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So can you explain, it's for someone who's obviously involved in horses, it seems ridiculous that this is such a pertinent topic. Can you explain what pony height measurement entails and why it is such a difficult topic?
Yes, sure, Georgie. I think let's start and say for children to compete in the graded pony classes, they need to be in possession of a valid SAEF height certificate. The pony measuring then refers to the official process that we have to do to determine the height of a pony, to obtain and to issue that certificate. And so the pony is measured, it's measured or standing squarely and relaxed, supposedly relaxed, standing on a level surface, and then it's measured with a calibrated measuring stick to obtain its height at the highest point of its withers. And that's basically the process of pony measuring to obtain its height. Now, I think it's very important that we enforce measuring rules and regulations, just simply because it can influence the outcome of competitions. It's very unfair, I think, to expect a child with a smaller pony to compete against a horse, for instance, which has got much more horsepower and bigger horse stride. So pony measuring definitely helps level the playing field.
Well, it's really a fairness issue, and
yes,
I think especially
definitely.
for children who are coming into the sport,
Yes.
it's a fundamental core principle of sport.
Yes, and it allows then children to compete against their peers with similar horsepower or pony power and similar striding, which makes it just very fair.
So that would matter across all disciplines.
All disciplines at the moment, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Summer, what are the official height thresholds that differentiate horses from ponies?
So the official measurement at the moment, so if you have a pony without shoes, they can measure up to 148 centimeters, and then a pony with shoes up to 149. I think it's important to know, though, that you have from 148.1 to 148.9 centimeters, which is an allowable margin if you don't have shoes, and similarly with horses that do, or ponies that do have shoes, from 149.1 up to 149.9 centimeters. So it's rounded down.
And are those fluctuations to do with, we'll speak about it later, things like hydration and
you have a couple of differences that occur throughout the day, or the way that the pony stands. And I think in fairness to the pony, that's why we round down, or it's internationally accepted.
Okay. From a veterinary perspective, how is an accurate measurement obtained, and what factors play a role in this?
So we try to be as regular in terms of our measuring technique as possible. So all of the pony measurers measure in the same way.
And who are the pony measurers?
So up here in Gauteng, it's myself and Dr. Sheila Higety, and then we have Dr. Leslie Tuberger, who is in the Northwest province, I think. And then down in KwaZulu-Natal, we have Dr. Sean Miller. There is Dr. Angela Nickus, who does pony measuring out in Bloemfontein. And then down in the Cape, we have Dr. Lauren Tregoning, Dr. Jean de Villiers, and Dr. Lee Baragwanath.
Okay. And you've all trained in the same way, and you do run, as far as I understand, pony measuring days that
Yes.
people can present their ponies?
Yes, correct. Yeah, so the SAEF sanction.
And what is that? Sorry, and then I interrupted you. What is that protocol that you follow?
So what we do, so we obviously, as the pony comes in, we have a look at the pony and we identify the pony. We make sure that the passport, what we are...
We're measuring the correct pony.
Correct pony, exactly. It sounds ridiculous, but yes.
Okay.
So we check the microchip, we check the ID. We then trot the pony up. Part of the passport checking, though, is also checking the vaccination status because these ponies are considered in competition, and I think that's important for people who come to pony measuring to know. So there are certain rules which apply, to these ponies when we check them. And then they are brought up onto the square or the slab where we measure, and each pony measurer measures...
And that's been a pre-leveled
It's a pre-leveled,
slab.
yeah, that's correct. And the sticks that we utilize are calibrated, so they're recalibrated every 3 years. And each pony measurer measures on the left and the right-hand side. So it's a bit of we call it like an intra-measurer check. So I need to make sure that I get the same measurement on the left and the right-hand side of the pony. And then I don't chat to the other measurer. The measurer comes up separately, the second measurer. And they measure the same on the left and the right, and then we confer and see whether our measurements are the same. If there is ever a discrepancy, sometimes you don't get to the same measurement, the lower of the two measurements stands.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems very fair.
It's in the pony's favor, effectively, yeah.
But in effect, the pony is actually measured 4 times.
Yeah.
So that's a good safeguard there.
What are the most common misconceptions that you face from owners about pony height?
I think from our point of view, I think a lot of owners feel that we are there really to try and catch out ponies, and actually that's honestly not what we're there for. We're just trying to get an accurate measurement, and whether it falls then into a pony or a horse category, that's out of our hands. But I think sometimes there is a little bit of a misconception in the community that we're sort of out
the
to
enemy.
We are exactly that we're out to really we have a certain quota that we need to catch
out.
these ponies and kick them out, exactly.
And Peter, I think that's really important where your notion of fairness comes in.
Yeah.
I think also I remember I think we have done a podcast on this before, but very briefly touching on the fact it's also a safety issue when tracks are built for ponies. So it's not, like you said, about catching people out, hopefully.
I think that also there's the idea that there, especially as far as it pertains to borderline ponies, that there is there's no leeway for borderline ponies, and that the system is unfair to both borderline ponies. And in that aspect, I just wanted to point out again what Summer said, Dr. Summer said, is that there is already a leeway built into the restriction, the height restriction, because up to 48.9, we still take as 48, So there is 0.9, which is actually far more than normally it should have been really 0.5. But there's a very big room to move for ponies that's already to make sure that those borderline ponies are still within the right restriction. Yeah.
So I'm sure it's very frustrating then when you've got an owner trying to ask for that extra 0.1, a 0.2 point. It's they must also be fair to you. What are the current regulations governing pony height in South Africa, and how does that align with international standards?
So I think we follow this, SAEF follows the FEI regulations very closely. So, in terms of the pony heights, that's why we utilize the 148 and the 149 as a cutoff. And also recently the FEI had brought in where if you are a pony between the age of 6 and 8 and you measure between 140 centimeters without shoes or 141 centimeters with shoes, you can then be awarded a life height at that age. Okay. So it's a way to also try and streamline that process and
that they're not represented.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
From a legal standpoint, what obligations do owners have regarding the accurate declaration of a pony's height?
Well, in terms of the person responsible, they have to make sure that they have obtained a height certificate to compete as a pony.
And I know in adult riding, the rider is always responsible, not necessarily the owner. So as riders, we're held accountable for dope testing and things like that. In the case of children, who is the relevant party? Is it the owner? Is it the parent of the child because they're a minor?
The relevant party remains the rider. The
Okay.
relevant party, the person responsible remains the child. unless it is a situation, a contractual situation, where he requires to have a guardian or somebody to act in his stead. But the person then that would still be responsible to see that his pony his classification would be the child. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But essentially, they do need to be guided then
Yes,
ethically by an
definitely.
adult
Yeah.
who's not
Yeah.
going, unless they don't like their child. Then
Yeah.
they can. I'm joking. Don't throw your child under the bus. What are the consequences, both sporting and legal, if a pony is found to be incorrectly misrepresented?
Well, I must say we have quite the biggest challenge that we have at the moment is persons that will try to manipulate the stances or to manipulate the measurement, just to manipulate the stance of the horse, whether it's the posture or the feet.
And sorry, can you just explain, and Summer, maybe this is a question for you, before we carry on with that, with misrepresentation, what do people do to try and make ponies measure height? Because I think, again, it's important for parents who are new coming into the sport. Hopefully this podcast is watched again year in and year out by newcomers. What do they need to be aware of that trainers or sellers might be trying to do to make a pony measure?
Georgia, so I think from the veterinary side of things, at the very least, what we're looking out for is horses that are lame. So that is why we trot them up in the beginning. And any kind of lameness is a refusal to measure. So if we have a lame pony, it's irrelevant if it's coming from the feet or if it's from the fetlock. It's a refusal to measure.
And
so
is that because they could be trimming the feet
So
excessively?
in theory, yes. If they're footsore, they've been trimming the feet. So that is a technique that is sometimes utilized, where they over trim the feet, trying to make the pony smaller. So that is something that we look out for. You can't have snacks when you are on the measuring square, for example. So you can't be feeding them carrots because that changes their sort of normal resting posture. And I think what is important to differentiate is there's a difference between training or desensitizing the pony to the measuring procedure and manipulating the pony during the measuring procedure. So we will often say to people, we recommend, get yourself a measuring stick, teach your pony to stand, square at home, get it used to having the stick on both sides, because they're very comfortable with it on the left usually, and when you approach them from the right, they think you're going to poke them to death. Exactly. So, we do say, get them used to the stick so that they're comfortable and when they relax basically for the procedure. But we can see if there is any manipulation with specific, cues or signals that the pony gets where they're standing a certain way, and then as soon as you put the stick on, for example, then the pony will lower its head. It's no longer standing in its normal relaxed stance. So that would be a refusal to measure. So that does happen.
That's really interesting.
And I mean, back in the day, withers had been broken and so on. We don't see that anymore, thankfully. We've moved on. But certainly over trimming, and then
That's insane, though, to think that that's something that was done.
was a thing, yeah.
Sorry, so Peter, back to you.
Yeah, so our
what are the
instructions-
ramifications legally?
Yeah, our instructions to our
misrepresent
measuring vets are to enforce the rules strictly. So if there's any suspicion that there's a manipulation of the horse's stance or of the horse's posture, they have the SAEF's backing to refuse the measuring.
Okay.
And that's normally a hotly disputed topic, but the fact is that there are rules, and the veterinarians are very experienced. We were just talking, they've been measuring over 1,500 horses this year,
That's
this
fantastic.
last 2 years, I think.
That's amazing.
So they are very experienced,
Okay.
and they are very good.
And technically that number's doubled because you had to do it from both sides. Yeah.
Yeah, so if a horse is then, if there is misrepresentation, there's normally disqualification. If there's at an event, there would also be then reclassification, obviously, of the pony to a horse, being a horse, and barred from competing as a pony. And then there would be disciplinary actions from the SAEF side instituted, which could lead to either a fine or suspension.
Is that fed down through the Discipline Association?
Yes.
Or through, okay.
Yeah. Well,
right.
well, pony measuring would come directly to
From the
SAEF, yeah, because it's something that we handle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How are these disputes currently handled, and are there clear appeal processes in place? So you've presented your pony for measuring, you've been chucked out. What is the next step for the owners?
Well, there is an opportunity to have the pony measured again. I mean, Summer.
So you can ask to have the pony remeasured once again within that same year, and then once the following year, and then once the following year thereafter. So in other words, you could have an attempt at 4 measurements in a 3-year cycle.
Okay. So you can't actually represent it at the same show. You can't. Okay. No, that's quite intense. I think we have brushed on this, but what role does the veterinarian team play in ensuring fair and consistent measurements? And I think you've said there's always 2 on site. The slabs are in place. So are they designated measuring sites?
There are.
I know at KPC, for example, there is the one slab.
Yeah, and the Port Elizabeth Riding Club, I think, has the slab that we utilise down in the Eastern Cape. There is also in George, at the George Riding Club. There are 2 in KZN. I'm not sure where the venues are, and same with...
And if people are looking to reach out to have a new pony or a honey remeasured, who do they contact? Do they contact SAEF? Do they work through the discipline association?
Probably the easiest would be to chat to Mariette at the SAEF. So she handles all of that, and we can, if it's an extraordinary session, we can organise that. Where it is, the people can organise that where, for whatever reason, they need to have it done, like there's a sale that needs to be concluded, for example, we can do that. I think they just need to be aware that they carry the full cost of that measuring session on their own.
Okay. The other measuring sessions are at SAEF's cost. They just need to present the pony.
There is a nominal fee. I'd have to double check with Mariette, but I think it was 500 Rand per pony.
Okay. Again, we've touched on this briefly, but what are the welfare concerns associated with attempts to influence or manipulate a pony's height?
So, I mean, I think, if you have trimmed a pony particularly short because you're trying to make it shorter, you obviously have a footsore pony. The wither breaking is a very extreme thing. I think ultimately people need to be aware that if you are manipulating a honey to be a pony, you could potentially be causing like a hazardous situation for the pony and the rider later down the line. Like we've spoken about how course designers do set up courses for particular or average stride lengths, and that is something to consider. So that's our main concerns, at least in terms of pony measuring.
At what age should ponies be measured, and how does growth or condition affect measurement?
So ponies, if they're competing, they need to be measured, and I mean ordinarily they would be probably from about 4 or 5 years of age. Up until the age of 8, they are awarded an interim height certificate, which means that they need to be remeasured at least once in a 15-month cycle thereafter until they turn 8. If they, at the age of 8, they are within the allowable height, they are then awarded a life height certificate, and then they don't need to be remeasured.
And that lifetime height certificate, what if there is down the line a query or it doesn't stand? That height certificate is favor.
Look, I think we would have to judge every case by its merit if that happens, but that's why it's the age of 8 is set, that we know that most ponies or most horses mature at that age, so we should have a very certain height at that age, so if a horse matures, we'll have to look at that, and obviously if there is evidence that a pony is not a horse anymore and it's significant, we will definitely have to intervene. And I can't at this point say what the outcome will be, but we'll have to relook at it.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's important to note that SAEF, as you said earlier on, Summer, is on the rider's side. We're ultimately here to advocate for the greater good, keeping ponies safe, keeping children safe, and fairness in the sport. How does pony height classification affect eligibility for different competitions and divisions? I think this, and I know you're not here in your capacity as a discipline association, but obviously with your interaction with FEI, this can have far-reaching consequences that affect who your national championship winners can ultimately be every year. Sure,
and I mean, I think that's why you need to really start doing your pony measurements from the age of 6 so that we can track them moving up. Unfortunately, if it measures outside of a pony, then it can no longer compete in those pony rider classes. So it is something to make sure that you are being, staying on top of and regularly measuring these ponies.
What are the implications for riders if a pony is reclassified out of a pony division?
Well, in that instance, obviously the pony would be barred from competing as a pony. The pony can be classified then as a horse. It may be ridden in a classification as a horse by a different rider. It may not be ridden by the same person.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it can be ridden in if the horse is reclassified as a horse, and then it may, as far as I know, be reclassified once a year.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, we
checked
with Mariette. Yeah.
Okay, so similar situation. I know this is a bit of a tricky situation to touch on, but how does pony height influence market value?
Yeah, well,
because this is a big thing for new parents again, and I want to keep stressing that, for those of us who've been doing this, several years over, but someone has to advocate for the new parents.
Yeah, so unfortunately that is why we find it challenging, and why we have the element of
surprise.
People trying
probably not.
No,
hopefully.
Definitely not. People trying to manipulate the height and manipulate the measuring process, because horses that obviously measure in, ponies are more valuable than ponies that don't measure or has a life height certificate at least. So I think that it's an important aspect for new pony owners to look into and make sure that what they are buying is a horse that has either a lifetime height certificate, or just look at the passport and make sure that it's been measured and that that you keep track on what the measurements are, and what you're buying. If a passport all of a sudden disappear, that's a red flag. Okay. If it doesn't have a recent passport and with recent measurements, and especially if it's a borderline pony, then you probably should have the pony measured before you purchase it, and make sure that you have something like a measurement subject to measuring clause in a contract, to just cover yourself for that. Yeah.
I think that's also important where the differentiation between unaffiliated and affiliated competition comes in.
Yeah.
Because you can be winning all these kids' classes in an unaffiliated show with essentially a honey, and the parents decide to take things a little bit more seriously. They spend a lot of money purchasing what seems to be a very successful pony, only to find out that they're not eligible to compete in graded classes or national championships.
Just to jump in, sorry Georgie, I think owners also need to, or potential owners need to know that ponies can be measured by their private veterinarians, but that doesn't qualify them to compete as a pony at an SAEF sanctioned show. So they need to make sure that the pony has gone to an official measuring session in order for it to be allowed to compete.
Thank you. I think that's great. You're touching on a passport going missing. And some of this is a little bit of a segue, but I believe the FEI is looking at bringing in digital passports. What kind of rollouts are we, time span?
No
long
idea.
time? Okay. I think
hopefully soon.
That'll be great.
That would be great.
That'll be a really interesting change to the, let's perhaps say, the honesty of the equestrian markets. I recently found out that the term for business nonsense in Russian is horse stealing. So if you suspect someone of ripping you off, the Russian term is horse stealing. So that we really are our own worst enemies here.
Actually in Afrikaans as well.
Oh, really? Peter, what legal protections can buyers seek to ensure they're purchasing a correctly measured pony? And is there any recourse that they can have? You spoke briefly about a pre-purchase contract.
Yeah, I think, as you say, if we don't really want to get involved when there is...
And it's not, and I think it's important to note, this is not SAEF jurisdiction.
Yeah, so we don't normally get involved in civil disputes and disputes or contracts and things like that. So if a pony was bought and there is, I would suggest to just have go to their attorney it's a normal contract breach, and they should have clear legal advice on that. But obviously you have recourse if, as I said, you make provision for that in your contract, that you are buying the pony specifically for the purpose to compete in the pony classes and the greater pony classes, and that it has got a height certificate to do so. Then I'm sure you'll have adequate recourse in our courts. Yeah.
Okay. What steps are currently being taken by the SAEF and relevant professionals to improve transparency and consistency in measurements? And I'm not talking about necessarily existing structures. Like, what are we looking at going forward?
So, Georgie, I think in terms of, the rules and regulations are there for everyone to have a look at. And actually, I recommend that people do prior to taking their ponies there, because then they know exactly what to expect.
And where would they find that on saef.org?
It is being updated, that's correct. So the new ones are not out yet, but they are being updated. But if you go to the FEI website, it's open
and we're
access.
aligned 100% with the FEI. Okay.
Effectively, yes. I mean, they're obviously, in terms of their competitions on the European, the international market, it's a little bit stricter in terms of the measuring veterinarians, but the process and the procedure is exactly the same. We follow the same protocol.
So, in other words, don't come for SAEF, go after the FEI.
Definitely.
Okay. From both of you, and I think separately, in your legal capacity and your veterinary capacity, what practical advice would you give to owners and riders to ensure compliance and to avoid disputes around pony height?
Yeah, I would just say make sure you've read the measuring terms and conditions that are sent to each participant before the event. Mariette does a lot of effort to get that out via email. It's basically an excerpt of the veterinary regulations on pony measuring, which really states very clearly how to present a pony and when the veterinarians will be able to refuse measurement. So yeah, just acquaint yourself with the rules around pony measuring. Make sure that the pony is measurable in terms of acquaint with the measuring stick and that kind of thing, and then if there's any questions, contact the SAEF, ask us beforehand. I know that there was issues in terms of passports not being up to date with vaccinations, all those things. Pony measurement is seen as in competition. It's seen as in an event. So that's why passports needs to be updated, and vaccinations must be updated according to vaccination protocols.
Going to be running a podcast next on updated vaccine protocols for any owners that are interested in that. So yes, so the whole passport has to be, in order for the pony to be
measured.
It has to be up to date and fully.
Yeah, otherwise the veterinarians are going to refuse because it's an in competition. It's seen as in competition. You intend to compete with the pony.
Summer, anything from your side?
To stole my thunder, because I was going to mention the fact I think people are often surprised when they get there and their passport is a shambles and it's a problem. So, from our side, I think so long as you follow the regulations in terms of the way that the pony needs to be presented.
Competition rules
apply, and with hand in hand with that goes the fact that if there is concern, we can also do drug testing. So, I mean, that obviously also has an impact should it come back positive. I think from our side, it is really just making sure that you're aware of the process from start to finish and being cognizant of the fact that you are in competition. Does change.
Is there anything else that either of you would like to add to that before we wrap up? Yeah,
I would just, from the SAEF's point of view, invite our members to contact us if they have any questions and if there's any uncertainties and if they are preparing and there's anything that they really don't know. We are there to help. We are there. We want our members to be happy participants in the sport, and that's why we do this. We do this to avoid disputes. That's pony measuring, as Summer said. It's not to catch out people, it's actually to avoid disputes, because we've received so many complaints of unfairness of horsepower and pony power competing against each other, and we are trying to mediate that by enforcing the pony measuring rules.
I think if we can start to create a national federation that's by the people for the people, it goes a long way to creating these transparent conversations. I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today.
Georgie.
Summer was very reluctant to join us on the topic of pony measuring. I think she's got some PTSD. I hope you weren't one of those people who gave Summer PTSD. And this is just a reminder that the topic of pony measuring is centered around fairness in sport, which is a really critical core element for children who are looking towards being the future of this wonderful, wonderful sport that we all love in South Africa, equestrianism. So please, if you have any further questions, do reach out to the SAEF. As Peter said, they are by the members for the members. Otherwise, thank you for joining us today on this episode of From the Horse's Mouth.